So, I'm sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, trying to figure out what to make for dinner. My husband, Mark, is in the living room, watching some sports game, football, baseball, I don't even know anymore. It's all the same to me. The sound of the crowd cheering and the commentators droning on is just background noise at this point. But then, my phone buzzes. It's a text from my coworker, Jake. We've been working on this big project together for months, and we've gotten close. Like, really close. At first, it was just harmless flirting, you know, the kind that makes the workday a little less boring. But lately, it's been different. The text reads, "Hey, you free tonight? I've got something I want to talk to you about." My heart skips a beat. I glance over at Mark, who's still glued to the TV, completely oblivious. I type back, "Yeah, I can meet up." "Where?" Jake responds almost immediately, "The usual spot." 8 p.m.? The usual spot. That's this little bar downtown where we've been meeting after work for project discussions. Except, the last few times, we haven't been discussing much about the project. There's been a lot of lingering eye contact, accidental touches, and, well, you get the idea. I tell Mark I'm going out for a drink with some friends from work. He barely looks up from the TV, just grunts and says, "Okay, have fun." I feel a pang of guilt as I grab my coat and head out the door, but it's quickly replaced by a rush of excitement. I know this is wrong, but I can't help it. There's something about Jake that makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I walk into the bar, and there he is, Jake. He's already sitting at our usual corner table, 2 glasses of wine waiting. He looks up as I approach, and that smile of his hits me like a wave. It's the kind of smile that makes you forget, just for a second, about everything else in your life. "Hey," he says, standing up to pull out my chair. "You look amazing, as always." I feel my cheeks flush. "Thanks," I reply, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrays me. It's shaky, nervous. I sit down, and he slides the glass of wine toward me. We start talking about work, but it doesn't take long for the conversation to shift. He leans in closer, his voice dropping to that low, intimate tone that sends shivers down my spine. "I've been thinking about you," he says. "A lot." I take a sip of my wine, trying to steady myself. "Me too," I admit, and the moment the words leave my mouth, I know there's no turning back. The next hour is a blur. We talk, we laugh, we flirt. At one point, his hand brushes against mine, and neither of us pulls away. It's electric, and I can't remember the last time I felt this alive. But then, reality creeps in. "What about Mark?" Jake asks suddenly, his tone serious. I freeze. Mark. My husband. The man I've been married to for 8 years. The man who's sitting at home right now, probably still watching that game, completely unaware of what's happening. "I don't know," I whisper, looking down at my glass. "I don't know what I'm doing, Jake." He reaches over and tilts my chin up, forcing me to look at him. "You deserve to be happy," he says. "And if he's not making you happy..." He doesn't finish the sentence, but he doesn't need to. The implication is clear. I don't stay much longer after that. I make some excuse about needing to get home, and Jake walks me to my car. Before I get in, he pulls me into a hug, and for a moment, I let myself melt into it. But then I pull away, quickly, before I do something I'll regret. The drive home is a mess of emotions. Guilt, excitement, fear, longing, it's all swirling around inside me, and I can't make sense of any of it. When I walk through the door, Mark is still on the couch, exactly where I left him. "How was your night?" he asks, not even looking up. "Fine," I say, my voice tight. "Just, fine." I go to bed that night, but I don't sleep. All I can think about is Jake, and the way he looked at me, and the way he made me feel. And all I can wonder is, what happens next? The next few days are a whirlwind. I try to focus on work, but it's impossible. Every time Jake walks by my desk, I feel my heart race. We exchange glances, quick smiles, and the occasional text that's just a little too personal. It's like we're playing a game, and neither of us wants to lose. But then, on Thursday, things escalate. Jake suggests we grab lunch together, just the two of us. I know I should say no, but I don't. We go to this little cafe a few blocks away from the office, and the whole time, it feels like we're in our own little world. We talk about everything, work, life, dreams. He tells me he's always admired my ambition, my drive. I tell him I've always admired his confidence, his charm. And then, out of nowhere, he says it, I think I'm falling for you. I freeze. My fork hovers halfway to my mouth, and for a moment, I can't breathe. Jake, I start, but I don't know what to say. He reaches across the table and takes my hand. I know this is complicated, he says, his voice soft but urgent. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. And I think you feel it too. I want to deny it. I want to tell him he's wrong, that this is just a harmless crush, that it'll pass. But I can't. Because he's not wrong. I do feel it. And it's terrifying. I don't know what to do, I admit, my voice barely above a whisper. He squeezes my hand. You don't have to figure it out right now, he says. Just, think about it. That's all I'm asking. The rest of the lunch is a blur. We talk, but I can't focus. All I can think about is what he said, and what it means. When we get back to the office, I feel like I'm walking on autopilot. I sit at my desk, staring at my computer screen, but I'm not really seeing anything. That night, Mark and I have dinner together, like we always do. He talks about his day, about the game he's been watching, about the new project he's working on. I nod along, but I'm not really listening. My mind is somewhere else entirely. Later, as I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realize something. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living this double life, torn between two men, two worlds. I have to make a choice. But the question is, which one? The weekend rolls around, and I'm a mess. I can't stop thinking about Jake, about Mark, about the choice I know I have to make. But every time I try to sort through my feelings, I just end up more confused. On Saturday morning, Mark surprises me by suggesting we go out for breakfast. It's unusual for him, he's not exactly the spontaneous type, but I agree, hoping it might help clear my head. We go to this little diner we used to love when we first got married. It's nostalgic, sitting there across from him, sipping coffee and eating pancakes. For a moment, it feels like old times. But then, out of nowhere, Mark drops a bombshell. So, he says, setting his fork down and looking at me with this serious expression I haven't seen in years. I've been thinking, maybe we should try for a baby. I choke on my coffee. What? He shrugs, like he hasn't just turned my entire world upside down. I mean, we've been married for 8 years. We're stable. We've got the house, the jobs. I think it's time. I stare at him, completely blindsided. A baby? Now? When I'm in the middle of, whatever this is with Jake? My mind races, trying to process what he's saying, but I can't. It's too much. I don't know, Mark, I stammer. That's a huge decision. We'd have to talk about it. Really talk about it. He nods, but he looks a little disappointed. Yeah, of course. I thought it might be something you'd want too. I don't know what to say. The truth is, I used to want that. I used to dream about having a family with Mark. But now? Now I'm not so sure. The rest of breakfast is awkward. We make small talk, but there's this tension between us that wasn't there before. When we get home, Mark heads to the garage to tinker with his car, and I retreat to the bedroom, my mind spinning. Just as I'm about to call my best friend to vent, my phone buzzes. It's a text from Jake. "Hey, can we talk? It's important." My stomach drops. "What now?" I type back, "Sure. What's up?" His response comes a few seconds later, not over text. "Can you meet me?" I hesitate. I know I shouldn't. I know this is only going to complicate things even more. But I can't help myself. I need to know what's going on. "Okay," I reply. "Where?" He sends me the address of a park not far from my house. I tell Mark I'm going for a walk to clear my head, and he barely looks up from the engine he's working on. When I get to the park, Jake is already there, sitting on a bench under a big oak tree. He looks nervous. That's not like him. "Hey," I say as I sit down next to him. "What's going on?" He takes a deep breath, like he's steeling himself for something. "I got a job offer," he says. "In Chicago." My heart stops. "Chicago?" He nods. "It's a great opportunity. More money, better position, but it means I'd have to move. I feel like the ground is crumbling beneath me." "When?" "In a month," he says. He looks at me, his eyes searching mine. "I wanted to talk to you before I made a decision. Because if you want me to stay, I will." I'm speechless. This is it. This is the moment I've been dreading. The moment where I have to choose. But before I can say anything, Jake reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small box. My breath catches as he opens it, revealing a delicate silver bracelet. "I know this isn't exactly conventional," he says, his voice soft. "But I want you to know how serious I am about this. About us." I stare at the bracelet, my mind racing. This is real. This is happening. And I have no idea what to do. What would you do in my place, dear listeners? Imagine this: you're sitting on a park bench, holding a delicate silver bracelet in your hands, while the man who just gave it to you is waiting for an answer that could change both of your lives. Meanwhile, back at home, your husband of 8 years is casually talking about starting a family, completely unaware that your heart is being pulled in a completely different direction. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and no matter which way I stepped, I was going to fall. Jake was still looking at me, his eyes full of hope and something else, something that made my stomach twist. "I need to know," he said quietly. "Do you want me to stay?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could I possibly answer that? If I said yes, I'd be choosing him over Mark, over the life I'd built. If I said no, I'd be letting go of the only person who'd made me feel truly alive in years. I don't know," I finally whispered, my voice trembling. "This is all so much, Jake. I need time to think." He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Okay," he said. "Just, don't take too long, alright? I need to give them an answer soon." I promised him I'd think about it, and we parted ways. The walk home felt like it took forever. My mind was racing, trying to weigh the pros and cons, but every time I thought I'd made a decision, doubt crept in. When I got home, Mark was in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich. He looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Hey, how was your walk?" "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just needed some fresh air." He nodded, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Cool. Hey, I was thinking, maybe we should start looking into daycare options. You know, just to get an idea of what's out there. I froze. Daycare? Yeah, he said, taking a bite of his sandwich. You know, for when we have kids. It's never too early to plan, right? I felt like the walls were closing in on me. How could he be so casual about this? Didn't he see how much I was struggling? Or had he just stopped noticing me altogether? Mark, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know if I'm ready for this. He frowned, setting his sandwich down. Ready for what? Kids. Yes, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't know if I want this. If I want any of this. For a moment, he just stared at me, like he didn't understand what I was saying. And then, slowly, his expression changed. Wait, he said, his voice low. Are you saying, you don't want to be with me anymore? I didn't answer. I couldn't. But the look on my face must have said it all, because his eyes darkened, and he took a step back. Wow, he said, his voice cold. Okay. I guess I didn't see that coming. Mark, it's not that simple. Isn't it? He interrupted, his voice rising. Because it sounds pretty simple to me. You don't want this. You don't want us. I wanted to argue, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, as he turned and walked out of the room. And just like that, the life I'd known for 8 years started to crumble. I thought I had made the right choice. I thought I could leave Jake behind, focus on my marriage, and start the family Mark and I had always talked about. But life has a way of reminding you that the past never really stays buried. It started with small things. A text from an unknown number, you can't just walk away. I deleted it, thinking it was a wrong number. Then, a few days later, I saw him. Across the street, standing under a street lamp, his face hidden under a hood. Jake. My heart stopped. I told myself it wasn't him, that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. The next morning, I saw him again. This time, he was closer, leaning against a car, watching me as I took out the trash. His eyes, those eyes that used to be so warm, so full of life, were cold, empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. That's when I knew I had to tell Mark. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. Mark, I said that night, my voice trembling. There's something I need to tell you. He looked up from his book, concern etched on his face. What is it? I took a deep breath and told him everything. About Jake, about the texts, about seeing him outside our house. Mark listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he stood up, pacing the room. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice tight with anger. I was scared, I admitted. I thought if I ignored it, he'd go away. But he's not going away, Mark. He's not the same person I knew. Mark stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes hard. We'll handle this, he said. Together. The next morning, Mark stayed home from work. He positioned himself by the window, watching the street. I tried to go about my day as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. And then, around noon, I saw him again. Jake, standing across the street, his hood pulled low over his face. Mark saw him too. Stay here, he said, his voice calm but firm. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and walked out the door. I watched from the window as Mark crossed the street, the bat resting on his shoulder. Jake didn't move, didn't even flinch as Mark approached. You need to leave, Mark said, his voice loud enough for me to hear. And if I ever see you near my family again, you'll regret it. Jake laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. Your family, he said, his voice dripping with venom. She was never yours. She'll never be yours. Mark swung the bat, but Jake dodged it with surprising speed. He grabbed Mark by the collar, slamming him against the car. I screamed, running out the door, but before I could reach them, Jake let go, stepping back with a twisted smile. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at me. You can't hide from me. And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Mark was shaken but unharmed. He held me close, his arms tight around me. We'll get through this, he whispered. I promise. But as I looked over his shoulder, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, watching, waiting. And I knew, deep down, that this was far from over. The days that followed were tense. Mark installed security cameras around the house, and we both agreed to be extra cautious. I quit my job, hoping to cut all ties with Jake, but it felt like no matter what I did, he was always one step ahead. Then, one night, it all came to a head. I was putting our daughter, Lily, to bed when I heard a noise downstairs. My heart raced as I crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness. Mark was at work, and I was alone with Lily. Mark? I called out, hoping it was him coming home early. But there was no answer. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. As I waited for the operator to answer, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming closer. Hello? The operator's voice came through the phone. I need help, I whispered, my voice barely audible. There's someone in my house. Before the operator could respond, the bedroom door flew open, and there he was. Jake. His eyes were wild, his face twisted into a sinister grin. You thought you could get rid of me, he sneered, stepping closer. You thought you could just move on. I backed away, shielding Lily with my body. Stay away from us, I said, my voice trembling but firm. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. You belong to me, he said, his voice low and menacing. And I'm not letting you go. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. Jake's eyes darted to the window, and for a moment, he hesitated. That was all the time I needed. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and hurled it at him, hitting him square in the chest. He stumbled back, giving me just enough time to grab Lily and run. I bolted down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear Jake behind me, his footsteps heavy and fast. I reached the front door just as it flew open, and Mark burst in, his face a mask of fury. Get out of my house. Mark roared, tackling Jake to the ground. The two men grappled, their fists flying. I stood frozen, clutching Lily to my chest, as the police stormed in, pulling them apart. Jake was handcuffed and dragged away, still screaming threats and curses. Mark rushed to my side, his face bruised and bloodied but filled with relief. Are you okay? He asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. We're okay, I whispered. Thanks to you. Jake was arrested and charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and assault. He was sentenced to several years in prison, and though it wasn't a perfect resolution, it gave us the peace we needed to move on. Mark and I grew stronger through the ordeal. We realized how much we meant to each other and how far we were willing to go to protect our family. Lily, now a bright and curious toddler, became the center of our world, a constant reminder of the love and resilience that had brought us through the darkest of times. As for me, I learned that the past can't be ignored, but it doesn't have to define you. I made mistakes, but I also found the strength to face them and build a better future. And so, life went on. Not perfect, but ours. And that was enough. The end.